This has been the talk of everything recently. We're talking about, of course, the Jordan Neely killing on the subway. The New York Times put out a tweet headline here that I thought was noticeable. I tweeted about this myself. A 30-year-old man died on the subway on Monday after he was placed in a chokehold, the police said. Witnesses said the victim had been acting in a, quote, hostile and erratic manner towards passengers on the train when the other man, 24, moved to restrain him. So Jordan was obviously, I'm sure many of you guys have heard this story, placed in a chokehold for 15 minutes and died. The 24-year-old man who choked him was a Marine. We have a little bit of reporting here. This was from a passenger on the train who gave this quote to the New York Post after the incident happened. He, meaning Jordan, started screaming in an aggressive manner. He said he had no food, he had no drink, that he was tired and doesn't care if he goes to jail. He started screaming all these things, took off his jacket, a black jacket that he had, and threw it on the ground. Now, the first thing that caught my eye, because this was on camera, and we're not allowed to show that kind of violence here on YouTube without the video getting an age restriction on it, in which case no one would see it.
We mainly market to children.
Yeah, exactly. Well, honestly, I'm not interested in showing that video anyway. It was really, really horrible to watch. I did watch it. But he was in the chokehold for 15 minutes. So here you have a white man chokes a black man to death on camera. But it seems like because that black man was a homeless man, the incident could be described in this very passive voice. Well, he died on the subway. He was acting in an erratic manner. And there was another passenger on the train who moved to restrain him. Now, look, I lived in New York City for 7 years. Russell has lived in New York City for 81 years. Okay.
181. 181
years. We are both New Yorkers here. I want to talk about this in a way that speaks truth to my experience riding the subway every day in New York as I did. I rode this F train every day in New York for the first 2 years that I lived there. I worked at Radio City Music Hall. I took the L in, got it, the F at 6th Avenue, took it up about 5 stops to Rockefeller Center. Now, the significance of that 5 stops is that this guy, the train finally stopped at the Broadway Lafayette stop. So this was a local train running in Manhattan, which means assuming it was not stopped in a tunnel for any road work or traffic or anything like that, this train had to have made about 5 stops because that's about the time it took me to get from 14th up to 51st. It goes Broadway Lafayette, West 4th, 14th, 23rd, 34th, 42nd. So you're talking about, and these stops are all, you know, maybe 2, 3. Yeah, Rockefeller would be the next one. These are all like 2-3 minutes apart. So if he's getting a chokehold for 15 minutes, there were ample opportunities. Like I said, unless the train was parked somewhere, which we don't know, but there were ample opportunities to simply take the guy off the train, get the conductor to stop the train, they get the cops down there, and they deal with this. That's if you have to detain him. Now, I want to speak to that in a second, too, because as someone who's ridden the subway many, many times, I want to be absolutely accurate in my sort of assessment of how often you run into an issue on the subway. It's not all the time. It's not most of the time. It's not even half the time. I would, though, put it at 20 to 25% of the time you get on a subway, there's going to be a nut on the subway who makes you at least a little bit uncomfortable. Now, maybe this was a particularly hostile person on the subway, but feeling uncomfortable on the subway because a homeless person is going off on the subway is a fairly common occurrence in New York. It's something that people deal with all the time. And so for me, I've ridden on the subway where I had a homeless guy spit in my face one time. I was standing on a crowded train, just holding.
Yeah, you have that kind of face, kid.
Yeah, that's true. I have a very spittable face. I've heard. I'm holding the center bar, and I hear a guy ranting, And I didn't really know, I didn't bother looking up, it was just, it's background noise. Like it happens so often. A lot of times you don't even react to that. And then I felt a wad of spit in my face. And I looked up, and it turns out this guy, for some reason, was just ranting at me. I don't, yeah. And it's not like I was sitting in a seat. It's not like I did anything that would prompt it. Sometimes on a subway, you have to be careful. Like sometimes you have to be careful. Like if you sit in a seat that a guy was going to take, maybe they get pissed off or something like that. Or if you're blocking their way or whatever. But no, this was nothing like that at all. And I choose not to escalate in those situations. I was getting off at the next stop anyway. I just got off because the situation can only get worse, I think, if you start a fight over that, right? And some people would say you're not starting it, you're simply responding. Fair enough. There are some people who are just not going to take shit, or who are going to be threatened. We're going to feel threatened in a way by that kind of erratic and hostile attitude, that they are going to take matters into their own hands. That's happened on the subway too. I've seen skirmishes break out where, somebody pushes somebody too far, or he says the wrong thing to the wrong guy and a thing happens, right? However, it never occurred to me that any of these things would end in a guy being placed in a 15-minute chokehold. Like, to me, if you're a New Yorker, you have to have thicker skin than that. I'm sorry. Like, the fact that you would choke the guy for 15 minutes and not even at any point, like, say, all right, are we good now? Are you cool? Can I let you go? Like, there was no communication. No, you just hold him there until he dies for 15 minutes, possibly across multiple stops where you had the opportunity to actually get off the train and call for help, or just remove the guy from the train car. Just take him off the train. If you have him constrained, as he obviously did, then why couldn't you just remove him from the car? To me, there's no reason this had to end this way. And one of the reasons I wanted to cover this is because, as someone in New York, I do understand that it can be scary and uncomfortable to have a guy go off on a train. You're underground, you're in a dark tunnel, the cops are not right there for you if you need them, right? But these situations are fairly common. They're fairly common, and there's no excuse for it to have ended in this way.
Okay. All right. So this poor man was, in my opinion, killed by the way that we deal with mental illness in New York before he ever got on that train. This is something I have some personal experience with. My building where I live has been tormented. Those of you who have been longtime viewers will know about this. Tormented by a severely mentally ill tenant on the first floor. He has been arrested, detained, brought to psychiatric facilities multiple times. There's currently a warrant out for his arrest because he stole an entire mattress out of the hallway just last week. New owners have taken over the building, and they're in the process of evicting him. I'm sure they will probably eventually be successful. This person literally, in the height of the pandemic, during the lockdown, was rubbing shit, his own shit, on the walls of the building in the middle of a pandemic. We still could not get him committed. And I'm not saying this in a retaliatory way. He needs help. That's horrible that they keep letting this person go back to live by himself in this apartment, going crazy down there. I've seen the apartment when they've broken down the door. It's like bizarre ritualistic stacking of boxes and things. I mean, he's sick. It's not his fault. But this is what the city does. So when you see pictures that they're showing of this guy doing Michael Jackson, I'm sure that's not what was going on with him now, because the guy downstairs used to go to work in a camel hair coat and a suit. And that's not what he looks like now. My suspicion, given the age that he is. And the fact that he wasn't like that and then he became like that is it's probably schizophrenia, which tends to come on in around college age. You know, and it's a tragedy. Basically, they got much looser about the standards of involuntary commitment, first as part of a project of deinstitutionalization in the 50s and 60s and 70s, of taking people out of institutions and putting them into communities, right? This, as very often happens with the best of intentions, yes, that's not a bad idea if you fund proper support services for the mentally ill. Like maybe this person down on the first floor could live properly on his own if he had social workers and psychologists coming in to help him out and to give him counseling, but he doesn't have any of that. He's just sitting there by himself going crazy in a room. And there are a lot of people like that. The only reason he's not homeless is because his father used to own the building. That's how he wound up there. Once he gets evicted, he is going to be one of these people out on the street. And because the system, there is a warrant out for his arrest right now. And in my opinion, there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. He needs to go to a psychiatric facility. He does not need to be in prison. And I believe by estimates, the majority of people in prison are victims of mental illness, a majority. So this is the system really failing people. This victim on the subway, he had been detained 40 times. 40 times. Why was he not placed in a psychiatric facility? Clearly, there's something going on with him. Why was he left on the street? And this is really what's sick about it. So this rather idealistic movement to deinstitutionalize people also saved the government a lot of money, right? It cost them money to put people into psychiatric facilities. So that's why you didn't get more resistance against it, because for them, they're saving money. They got to cut a lot of beds over the last 20 years. 18% of the beds for people with mental illness have been cut in New York City. But now Eric Adams, when he did become mayor last year, said they were going to start to more aggressively involuntarily commit mentally ill homeless people. We have an article about that. What happened when Eric Adams tried to address this? And listen, I am no fan of Adams, okay? He was the first politician I did a gotcha question on the street. We aired that a while back. Faces backlash for move to involuntarily hospitalize homeless people. So here was his statement. For too long, there has been a gray area where policy, law, and accountability have not been clear. And this has allowed people in need to slip through the cracks, Adams said. This culture of uncertainty has led to untold suffering and deep frustration. It cannot continue. And you know what? There are questions about whether the city, as I said, they cut 18% of beds. So if you did enforce this policy, where would they go? Would they be properly taken care of? Those are all legitimate questions. But that basic statement is absolutely right. But naturally, he got pushback. So Mayor Adams continues to get it wrong when it comes to his reliance on ineffective surveillance, policing, and involuntary transport and treatment of people with mental illness. Jacqueline Simone, policy director for the Coalition for the Homeless, said in a statement on Tuesday, homeless people are more likely to be the victims of crimes than the perpetrators. That's true. But Mayor Adams has continually scapegoated homeless people and others with mental illness as violent. I don't really think that's the point. There are a lot of people like this victim on the subway who should have been in a facility. I'm not blaming the victim. I'm blaming the system. I'm blaming the system that did not give him the help that he needed. This is a legitimate area that we on the left cannot just in a knee-jerk fashion say no, we can't talk about it on that level. This is terrible. The police, we can't go that way, because you empower the right wing when you do that, because that's not a reasonable position. That is not compassionate towards these people. We have a photograph of the person that I'm talking about. Show you I'm not talking out of my ass.
Yeah, and we don't show his face, or we're not going to give him.
No, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. They literally pulled him out of his apartment in a tinfoil hat. He was back in that apartment in a few days. In a few days, they put that guy back in an apartment. Now, he is going to wind up eventually being evicted. What's going to happen to him? He's going to be out there on the street. He's going to be one of these people on the subway. In terms of what actually happened, it has definitely been scarier in New York post-pandemic. I've been in situations since the pandemic more than ever before the pandemic, where, yeah, I mean, you'll have mentally ill people going off on the subway. Every time I'm on the subway? No. Most of the time I'm on the subway? No. But it happens more than it used to, where you have situations that are scary. And you wonder if you're going to be one of those people who winds up on the news that night. Wrong place, wrong time. When you're sealed inside a metal box in a tunnel with somebody screaming violent threats and walking up to people, yeah, it's a scary position to be in. And I think that's a big part of why, from what I've seen of people who were interviewed who were in that subway car, none of them seem to feel that this person should not have been restrained. Now, the question is, as a New Yorker, if shit goes down on the train like that, what will normally happen is the next station you get into, everyone runs to the conductor. Right? Everybody runs off that car as fast as they possibly can. Get the NYPD, get the NYPD. Right. I don't understand why this person was choked for 15 minutes. What? Like, what happened? What happened there? There doesn't seem to be any, I mean, there is no reason for that. And why even use a choke? Like, if this guy was a trained Marine, aren't there other ways that this person could have been restrained? So this is basically what I'm saying. You can't, if you've never experienced that, you can't just have a knee jerk. Nobody should have intervened. Nobody should have done anything. But what they did was unnecessary. It didn't have to go down like that. And I really want to, as Keaton points out, 15 minutes is like 5 stops. So how could you not?
5 stops. The train stopped 5 times. There's a local train.
Right. So that doesn't make any sense. Like, the very first stop you get to, you should have gone to the conductor and gotten the NYPD. I don't understand why none of the bystanders did that. So
no, look, even before this, scarier time that you speak of, I haven't lived in New York City since 2017, so I wouldn't know. I've probably ridden the subway 5 or 6 times in the past 3-4 years, right?
That shit goes on more, and it seems to be more extreme.
Okay, but like even in my day, even in the pre-pandemic sort of halcyon days, 2014, 2015, right? There were people who did not take that shit well. Like, if someone went up to them on the subway, there were some people who fought back. And look, like, some people are just not going to let anybody get up in their face, no matter who they are or what the deal is. And, that's the way it goes. I mean, you live in a big city of 8 million people. You're going to have people who take shit and people who don't. To choke a guy for 15 minutes is extreme. And, whether it's homicide or manslaughter, it's got to be something. I would say, man, I've had a lot of interactions with people on subways who could have been deemed a threat. I never occurred to me to choke one of them. Never occurred to anyone I was in the proximity of to choke any of them. And some people did fight back. They don't choke them to death.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, this is why I'm saying if you're a trained Marine, you should know how dangerous a chokehold is. I mean, that's why the cops aren't allowed to use them.
Right.
And,
and he's on the floor,
listen,
laying
man,
under him.
If you don't know martial arts, you ever mess with somebody who knows martial arts, man, you know, they can just like grab your arm and twist it in a way that you can't move. Like hold the back of your neck. Right. Just hold you like that. So why was a chokehold necessary? Like, was the guy being a cowboy? Was he trying to show off? Was he trying to play hero? I mean, it seems that way. All I'm saying is, look, that is pretty terrifying. And it wasn't just him, it was two other guys. And none of the people who were on that subway car who have been interviewed, maybe other people felt differently, seemed to feel like this person should not have been restrained. And having been in that situation many times, I can tell you, man, a lot of the people who are just categorically saying this person should never have been touched, nothing should have been done, they wouldn't have been saying that if they had been on that car. I promise you, they wouldn't be saying that. I'm
on Twitter a decent amount these days. I honestly haven't heard anybody put it that way. You know what I mean? I like the comments that I've heard was that this was an extreme overreaction, especially for a New Yorker, who for whom like this stuff is not so out of the ordinary.
That's my other question. Like, is that guy a New Yorker?
Right. Like this is like the thing that like a tourist from Kansas would do, who just has never had an interaction of this kind. And think, oh my God, there's a crazy person on the subway, as if that's not kind of par for the course almost when you take a train. Right. So yeah, that's another question I had, because as someone who, like I said, used to ride the subway all the time, it's just so maddening that this went down this way. But also, I think that the bigger story here, and actually Nathan Robinson wrote an article in Newsweek that I haven't read yet, but I think the headline was more or less right. Actually, I'll give credit where it's due. He said, you know, this is a reflection, like, I'm sorry, like this headline here assumes, and, you know, like the New York Post is obviously much less tactful about this than the Times. They called the, you know, Jordan Neely a vagrant, right? But even the Times, even the liberal New York Times, just sort of assumes that, yeah, this was handled in a way that was, if not appropriate, forgivable, or, you know, understandable, because, hey, this is a crazy homeless person. Like, we have dehumanized poor people and homeless people.
Sure.
And there is this sort of prevailing sense that their lives are not important. They don't mean anything. Well, and so therefore, if you feel it all threatens, choking them to death over the course of 15 minutes is not immediately chargeable in some way. Like, it seems like that has to be chargeable in some way. And when it comes to the sort of like compulsory sort of institutionalization of mentally ill people, like, I obviously think, yes, this guy should have been in a home. Your neighbor, your downstairs neighbor, should have been in a home. But beyond that, you know, this just, I'm sorry, there's a kind of a running theme this evening. This just speaks to a decay of capitalism and a decay of our civilization. You have a guy here screaming, no food, no drink, tired, and doesn't care if he goes to jail. You know how fucked a person has to be for them to not be afraid of going to jail. Jail's a pretty horrible place. Jail in New York is a pretty horrible place. Rikers is no picnic. You got any idea, for a guy who's been arrested 40 times, for him to say, I've had it, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I don't care if I go to jail. This guy's at the end of his rope. Like, this is a system that fails people in obviously more ways than one. Not just in terms of not getting him the help that he needs, but in terms of, I'm sorry, New York, we talked about this in our last segment, really rich city, lots of housing available. Okay, a lot of very, very wealthy people, a lot of very wealthy, compassionate, good liberals live in New York. And yet the subways have become this underworld of chaos and desperation and despair. I mean, it was like that when I lived there. It's got to be worse now. It's got to be more unequal now than ever before.
There's a lot of shit that you haven't seen here in a long time that's kind of come back, right, post-pandemic. And yes, it is a collapse of capitalism. It's also a lot of chickens coming home to roost. You know, it's a lot of long simmering problems that, as long as the economy was really strong and gentrification was continuing apace, it was easier to cover it up. I'll say this as a contributing factor, that, you know, you kind of have to live here now to feel it. The vibe is more tense than it was before. It's just a tenser vibe. People are more paranoid. Like, they're more, because you do legit have more violence. So you have more headlines about violence. So naturally, people are more afraid that this isn't going to end well than they might have been before. Which would make them more prone to react preemptively before it gets to that point. And again, somebody who was arrested 40 times, I'm not saying he should have been in jail. He should have gotten the help that he needed. He should not have been out there. Mentally ill people are 16 times more likely to be killed by the police. Because, yeah, I mean, this guy, there's no saying he was arrested on violent assault in the past. There's no reason to say this wouldn't have gone that way. Maybe the cops wound up killing him instead of this guy. Like, it's dangerous for them to not give them the help they need, to just continuously arrest, let them go, arrest, let them go. They shouldn't even be in the system that way. They should be where they can get the help that they need. They're not criminals. They're mentally ill.
Please clap.